We are back. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and we're actually back now. So
For
we're
real.
back in action. It's been a little bit of a break. At least in August, we had a few different episodes out there. Susan's back
Ooh.
too. Susan, how are you?
Woo! Fresh off the dock, and I feel fantastic, as you can tell. I needed that recovery this summer. We had a very intense start to 2023, didn't we? With all the exciting things that we've been engaging on here at Team Elite. And so, yeah, I feel great. I banked all kinds of active recovery. Been working on my growth game, which is sometimes a little bit more challenging when you're in the hustle and the bustle. So yeah, I feel fired up and ready to go. How about you, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I had a big summer, did a TED Talk, doing a lot of promotion
Mm-hmm.
now. But now we're back in the pocket with the LLP podcast, and we have, I think it's around 15 guests that are scheduled right now. And so don't worry if you were a little bit out on August. We got a lot of great folks coming your way with a lot of great messages.
Oh yeah.
And the first one we have is Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Marie-Helene Pelletier. She's an international keynote speaker, an author of a book that's coming out in February called The Resilience Plan, a strategic approach to optimizing your work performance and mental health. And she's a work psychologist. Marie-Helene, how are you?
I am fabulous, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Marie-Helene, tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you to your mission in and around mental health.
Yes, followed my nose, really, mostly, but started out training as a psychologist and working as a psychologist early career, then quickly realizing, because some of my research, actually my doctoral research was, believe it or not, on telehealth 20 years ago.
Oh,
At the
wow.
time, I had to explain all the time how we do this, and I had to transmit data via telephone lines because the internet was not fast enough to do what we do like every day now. So, and I was testing the efficacy of psychotherapy done via video conferencing.
Oh, wow.
But to do this kind of work at that time, I needed a lot of management. I needed to have people in my team that would stay for a year unpaid. I needed a lot of funding to go train to be able to do this, to travel to do this, to go to sites that were doing this very innovative thing. All of this required a lot of management, which then made me decide I'm going to train as a leader. So did the MBA part-time and then started my career in very junior roles of management, like managing a call center. If anyone's ever done this, it is entering a fire every single day. and then progressed in different roles, worked in private, public. So lots of, in the end, senior leadership roles, strategic roles, and now have my own practice, my own business where I do mostly speaking and coaching and still keep a small psychology practice. But it is informed very much by both the psychology, research and best practice and the business side of research and best practices. And that's where my X is.
Whew, I have so many questions. You go ahead, Rob. I saw you step up to that mic first.
No, it's all right. And I guess where I want to start off, right, is like we always talk about this intersection of, mindset, mental health, and work performance. Like, can you break that down for us? Like, obviously the human shows up in all areas, but how does that interaction look to you?
Oh, it is everywhere, literally
Mhm.
everywhere. If I can pinpoint one of the places that I find is an opportunity for most leaders, because as leaders, we've heard these messages, we've incorporated many of them to some good degree, thankfully, that contributes to us thriving and enjoying what we do. I think what we're going to see even more as we continue to move forward and be informed by research in these areas are the very remarkable powers of using the less conscious part of our brain in preparing for challenges. So there is all the conscious parts that we can still optimize and we know about, but we're not necessarily optimizing. So that's one aspect. And we can talk more about this as well. I think one of the the newer perspectives we need to consider is, managing our mindset in advance, using concepts like priming so that we can prepare ourselves for so many unknowns that are part of what we do as leaders that we enjoy to some degree or enjoy a lot, but that we will continue to enjoy even more if we're even better prepared, if we enter these phases of higher demands with even more resilience.
Which some would say we are there, right? 44% of the workforce said that they were highly stressed the day before or something like that on that McKinsey study, right? That you sent me, Rob. So
the Gallup study.
Sorry, the Gallup study. But we're at that's an all-time high, right? And also burnout is the most rampant that it's ever been. So there has never been a more important time to prime these resources, right? In our subconscious mind. So let's just go a little bit deeper with that so that our audience can really plug into what the heck it is that us in the know here are knowing to be such a priority in this space. So what do we really mean when we say priming those resources?
Yes. And going back to even how you brought this part of the conversation, it is interesting, isn't it? How in some ways, especially in the past couple of years, everyone has heard way more about the importance of taking care of our mental health, all the things we know from research will make a difference from a conscious perspective. And just so we're all on the same page, we're talking, yes, about exercise, 3 types, cardio, strength training, and meditative type activity, nutrition, sleep, and spending time with people we enjoy spending time with. Yay for me, it's happening right now with you. So all these things, but we've heard about them. Everyone knows about them. No one doesn't really. Yet the burnout rates are increasing. The stress levels are increasing. And when I talk to audiences or individuals, are we doing it? Not necessarily. So all this to say that there are all the usual ways we've heard, the SMART goals, creating these goals that are high enough to be challenging, but not so high they're unattainable, all these. That's still true. So we don't want to let go of all the conscious ways to plan for building our resilience and protecting it. That's still true. It's not going away. What we are saying is there are non-conscious processes that may help us implement. So by priming, that's one of them. It's research-based, like researchers who used to work exclusively on conscious processes on reaching goals have now incorporated in their research this element, and to their amazement, because they were very conscious processes focused, they saw the research show them the data, study after study, showing the impact of priming. Priming refers to exposing our brain to words or images that represent our goals. And we know that by doing this, so visual exposure, literally, if you're wanting more relaxation, you could print the word relaxation, but we know from research the image is even more powerful. So whatever could represent relaxation for you, like someone meditating maybe, put this on a wall at a place where your eyes will see it, and that's all that needs to happen. And we know from research that when we do this, and I could give lots of examples of actually fascinating research, but if you just trust the research, when we do this, we are increasing our chances of reaching these goals. Still need all the conscious processes. We cannot not just focus on that and think about nothing, but it does add wind in our sails. So my point with this is these goals could be things that we're looking for as leaders over here. It could also be, my goal of incorporating better nutrition, maybe. So we can use it in different ways, but it's actually fascinating. Does not take a lot of time. Literally, that's probably an investment of 2 minutes. Find that image, print it, put it on the wall, and then see what happens.
I love that.
It's funny. I was actually listening to Pre-Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he was talking about that. And literally his example was we put a poster of someone running and like winning a race on the wall in a call center, and it boosted their productivity by I forget what it was, 40%.
60%. That's a famous study by Gary Latham and Locke and Latham. And, Cialdini is an endorser of my book.
Amazing. Yeah, he's really really
Amazing.
good, and his books are amazing. So
Yes.
yeah, it's so funny. Like I used to think that stuff was really hack. Like you walk into these offices and these posters, and you're like, "What is this?"
What the heck is this? Well, we talk about it in NLP as anchoring, right? Anchors are the same thing that you're describing there, right? Like we have visual anchors, we have kinesthetic anchors, auditory anchors, like things that basically are like mental heuristic tools or shortcuts into the subconscious mind, right? Where these resources live. And that really is because I wanted to double back to this whole part around all these things we know intellectually that we need to practice, which it's so interesting. This is literally where we started with me banking the active recovery all summer on the dock, right? We know all the things that we need to do. Why is it that we're not doing it when we're the most stressed we've ever been?
Yes, yes. And that exact question, Susan, is it's actually the core of the book, because that's exactly, I work very much exclusively with professionals and leaders. They find themselves in exactly this situation. They know they have all this, they know they should, they want to, they're not. And then they're feeling the impact. And so I found in my work with this population that often the way for me to present this was to use business analogies, what we do in business, and could we use similar principles, approaches, logic to consider how you're going to approach your resilience. And the key element of this is, there are many, but one of them is context, right? When a business is about to launch, or if as a business owner, we're looking to launch a new product or a new service, we're not going to just say, oh yeah, great, I've got this new service, we're going. We're going to, yes, be excited about it and look at, okay, who else is offering this? What is the current context? Our customer, who are my customers? Are they willing to pay for this? All kinds of things that are part of the context. What may help? What may hinder? How are we going to manage all these forces? And so I found that we need to apply the same logic, the same approach for us as individuals and leaders. So for example, all of us here, all three of us, may know that, yes, 5 times a week, half an hour of exercise would be ideal. That's our goal. And often when I ask people, what do you do on this side of things? They'll give me that exact answer. Oh, 5 times a week, about half an hour. And then I say, okay, well, how about the past 2 weeks? How does that look like? Past 2 weeks? Oh, past 2 weeks. Well, wait, that was mid-August, or, it was 2 weeks ago. And it was especially busy. So nothing there, but I did go for a hike 1 month ago. And so what we're seeing is that, okay, it's a great intention. However, it doesn't fit with your current context. Obviously, if it did, it would be in. So then we need to customize, hence this approach where we're looking at the realities of each of our contexts in this moment in time, because they will change, as we know, similar to business. We need to review the plan. Is it still working? Evolve the strategy, all these things, right? But we need to apply this to us here for our resilience. So it may mean, so let's say you, Susan, I'm going to invent all this information, but let's say Susan, these days, it's the beginning of the fall, her schedule is jam-packed. Yes, she wants to exercise 5 times a week, half an hour, but looking at the reality of her schedule for the next month, it's actually it's not going to happen. Okay, so given that now we're realistic about this, we're going to look at her context. What is going on? Is she traveling? Could we fit a 15-minute exercise in her hotel room as soon as she arrives? Could we fit these other modifications? Could we fit that while she's at the airport in the long lineup, listening to meditation, doing her deep breathing? There will be ways to incorporate these things in her life, in her schedule, if we've planned for it realistically in advance using her context. So then Susan's answer in a month from now won't be, well, yes, I'd love to, but I've done none of this. I know what my plan is, and I've done versions of this given my context. Very different. Better.
So it's our context that is oftentimes overlooked when we make these overly universal protocols or prescriptions, right, for active recovery. It's that we're not actually taking a leader's context into account.
That's right. Yes, that's a key component to it. And what also happens that gets in the way, I see in my work for this to happen, is you all do work that's very complex. You've trained for it. You've learned very complex things. So it's as if part of our brain is thinking, seriously, am I going to have to invest that much in like my resilience? It should be simpler than this. Like it's why would I spend this amount of time? Number one, yes, it is complex. Number two, it's actually not going to take an incredible amount of time. It just requires some of your attention to build it and then evolve it. And then you have the process in forever, which is part of the work I do, part of what the book does in a very applied way, so that no, it does not require a lot of time, but it does require some of your attention. That's all.
Always comes back to strategy from a mindset perspective, doesn't it, folks? Because it's really what we're talking about. Go ahead, buddy.
It's interesting, right? And I guess what I'd like to ask you is it's around that sort of internal resistance, right? And we see this a lot in all of the change work that we do, where it's like, yes, I want to do something, but then there's a lot of protection around status quo and around, getting our needs met in certain ways. And that's like not allowing us the ability to choose to actually change our habits. Like how much of the work that you do or is around empowering folks? Because it sounded to me like if you boil it all down, and I would say like the logistics are the real easy part, it's like you're really just helping folks learn how to empower themselves to choose to do this work.
Yes. I agree. A lot of this has to do with us changing our perspective on where does this piece fit in our ability to do our work well and enjoy it and feel happy in it. And that's for each time I work with someone individually, or even when I talk to an audience, then I'll review many of them. But there are, yes, what I call misconceptions, things that will get in the way. And these misconceptions, they come from the dominant discourse about how a leader should be. Sometimes they come from the specific field we're in. Like we're analytical here. We should not need to focus on emotions in any shape or form. We're here to help people, so therefore we don't need any help because I'm the helper, I'm the hero here, so I don't need anything. Or this is something I cannot influence, so there's nothing I can do about it because it's going to be whatever it is. Or to the opposite, I'm going to be as resilient as I want when I need it, as if it was a decision, and it's not. If the tank is empty, as much as you want, you cannot override an empty tank. It would be similar to getting your car, no gas in it or electricity, and saying, we're still going. Well, it's not going to go, right? So it's becoming even more clearly aware of those misconceptions that, to be fair, we actually lived with them as professionals and leaders earlier in our careers. So it's not like we've been having all these challenges forever and we're like resisting. No, for the beginning, it was fine. So why was it fine for the first 10, 15, possibly 20 years of our careers? And then you get to a point where you're like, it's not. Often it's the context that was different. Earlier in your life, you have a different set of demands, often less types of demands, often a context that naturally will allow this time to, remember this, going to the gym for 2 hours.
Oh, the days.
Right? And so there were, or whatever it was at the time, right? Or playing soccer twice a week with your friends, or, there was this context, which we did not realize. We didn't say, oh, look at this. How fabulous is this? I've got all this context that supports all the things that I need to have to perform as clearly as I can. Plus, we were also this much younger, brain functions better. That's the way it is. Mm-hmm. So there were all kinds of things going on there that actually did not sort of raise to the surface as, oh, look at all these protective factors, would be the technical term, that are already built in my life. We didn't do that. We were just like moving on, doing things, Then you keep moving on, doing things, as more demands come forward. And at some point, you're like, oh, okay, The tank is now at whatever, 10 out of 100, where I used to operate at 99 plus. So what's happening, right? So that often it's the context that has changed.
And is this just for the internal facing self-leadership work in terms of this resiliency plan? Or do you have actual protocols and tips and strategies for the leaders that are trying to bring this to their teams? Because I actually had a session with one of my CEOs yesterday, and, you know, Q4, economic downturn, possible layoffs. I mean, just even those three statements alone are enough to hit the fire alarm in our nervous system as a leader, right? So he was actually really coming to me for help. Like, what can I do to build up the resiliency for my team this fall? Because this is going to be one of the most intense Q4s that we've seen in a long time. So do you have strategies for leaders who are trying to build resiliency on their teams?
Yes. And I agree. The demands of various moments, specific moments, especially in the short term, will be creating a higher demand. They do start the alarm system in the brain, of course, in a useful way, and we want to manage it. And so a couple of things. So number one, I'll just back up for a moment. Ideally, as leaders, and often when I talk about leaders, I talk about the formal role of leader that some people may be in, but also the leadership, the influence, the support that all of us provide to each other in any interaction we have, also when we're not in a formal leadership role, right? And then everything in between, those that are not currently in a formal leadership role, who may be in the future. So we're more consciously training ourselves and practicing formally doing these behaviors that eventually will be formally part of our role. So there's, no matter where we're at, basically, all this still applies. And so in backing up, I'm going to say first, try to look at it from the longer term. So this CEO, yes, let's figure out some strategies in the short term. I'll get back to this in a second. And let's maybe plan for building the resilience of your overall team over time. Let's think about what's possibly your mental health strategy in this organization. So it's not just all on you as CEO also. There are other people over here. This is a community. This is a system. So there's more to be done in the longer term as well. And it's important because that's the reality of the system that an organization is. It's also important for the individual health of the CEO. It's not all on your shoulders. And that's important that we acknowledge this. So longer term, ideally, that would be something to plant, I would say.
Right.
But then we're in the short term, and I know I'm talking to you, so it's probably already part of your mind, but for the conversation, right? So that we're all together on this. And then in the short term, often the best way to influence a team is our own behaviors and sharing what we do. So I'm sure part of your work with this individual is to ensure that he optimizes his own actions and choices related to his resilience, some of which may be the 4 I mentioned earlier, and there are many others, right? But those 4 are just the 4 that research even more consistently points to. So that's the guaranteed return on investment. So you want to make sure that he does this. Then the second step would be influence this culture, model this by sharing not just, oh, how was your weekend? Great, I went for this longer walk with my partner. Great, I went for this long walk with my partner in order to help my own resilience and mental health. Okay, so now we're showing that
Modeling.
It's on the radar. It's part of what we support in this culture, part of what we talk about, suggesting that you could also do this and I'll support it. And it may even lead to a conversation about how about you, anything you did to support your own mental health, so that we can do these kinds of behaviors, not to the degree where it's all on us as individuals to like navigate all the demands that are coming in Q4 that are way bigger than us as individuals, but it is part of it. That's part of how we're going to navigate. In the short term, when we're like here, it's Q4, it's now, and that kind of thing. Others suggest 2 other ones, I would say perhaps, and I'm pausing because it is so dependent on context. It varies.
Sure.
There's many variables, but trying to see what could be useful for all of us to think about. The second I'd probably say is listen a lot. Ask a lot of questions and listen. And if people who are with us here today are in the employee position, then I would say go and talk. So even if they're not asking, share where you're at and what your needs are and what you're observing, how you're feeling, that kind of thing. It will be good for the overall organization. But as the CEO, I would say ask and encourage if he has other, elements in his structures, other leaders reporting to him or her to do the same thing with their teams. So lots of asking, listening, so that then we can bring resources or bring supports that will be aligned with what they need. Because otherwise, sometimes everyone, of course, will think about provide supports, but it may not be what they're hoping to get. And we see this time after time in research, teams trying to do the right thing, investing a lot of time, energy, and money at times, and only to find out that that was not where the main irritant was, right? So listening would be one. And the other thing I would say is, again, in the short term, because longer term, then you can do more planning with data and knowing what's going on, would be to continue to talk about the resources we have access to in this particular organization. So sometimes there are things like employee and family assistance programs. Sometimes there are online trainings, recordings that exist. Sometimes there are professional development opportunities, individual executive coaching. There may be different things that are available that the top person over here may assume everyone knows about because we've communicated about them. And we know from research that utilization rates tend to be very low, much lower than the proportion of people who could so benefit from it, truly all of us these days. So reminding of the existence of these resources. And again, if that CEO can themselves use some of these resources and share that they did, then we're, again, contributing to a culture where we're talking, we're supporting, we're using, and that may help the utilization rate.
Yeah, the model carries the most weight, right, buddy?
I mean, that's the biggest shift, right? And I think a lot of organizations miss this part is like, they go, oh, burnout's out. Let's do a lunch and learn on burnout, right? Like I've been in numerous of those, right? And it's like, that one is it doesn't support culture change or behavior change. The other thing is like, okay, so you did your lunch and learn and now you're just piling on more work. And so people are already gassed out and you haven't really like supported that. And then I do like, the vulnerability of the leader showing that like, I do use these things. And it's okay to ask for help and get that help from folks because we have these services for you. And so, yeah, I love this tip.
Yes. We often have conversations exactly about this because as a speaker, that happens. People will contact me, ask me to, come and talk to organizations or do virtual. And then very consistently, I'll ask, what else is going on? What else have you done? Are you in a situation where you now have a mental health strategy? Is this part of building one? Is this early days for you? Where does this fit? So that if they're already there, then we can even brainstorm about more ways to spread this conversation over time. And if it's early, then yes, there will be conversations about this because to your point, it's not going to be sufficient, and it could even be detrimental in some ways because then it's perceived as a way to squeeze even more out of you, which absolutely, it's not just unpleasant to receive anything this way, but it actually absolutely does not work, backfires. So it needs to be a planned strategy that is similarly customized to the overall organization.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, right? And I think, Susan, what you're picking up, and obviously that CEO is picking it up, right, is like jobs that have high demands but low control increases anxiety, stress response, burnout, depression, like all those things, right? Even if you're high stress and high performance, high control, folks are able to manage, and then obviously low performance and high control is also really good. But that's the element, right? Is everything feels out of control. The market's out of control. The governments are out of control. All these things are out of control. And it's like, a lot of folks land in the space of like, I'm powerless,
Mhm.
and you're not. And
Yeah.
that's a lot of what I talk about is like the how to deal with a bad boss is like, you can't control your boss, but you can control, one is what's going on up here, and two is how you're like creating that relationship with your boss. Even if they're toxic, there are still strategies you can use to sort of like draw the box around it, what you will allow, what you won't, and then what's your I'm walking away type of moment. Right. And I think this is the same thing, is like for folks out there, and we're seeing this across the board, right? More demands, less budget,
Less budget.
resources. But, we fired 20% of people, but like, you just got to do the same work in the same amount of time and deliver the same results. Right. And it's like, that sets you up for failure. But now it's about getting up here and into the resources to sort of get back that element of I'm in control of how I show up in me, and then how that pushes out to the team.
Yeah. Agreed. Very much agreed, Rob, and love how you're including within the options some of what I have control over, realizing, being realistic about what we don't. And part of what we have control over is at some point keeping on the list of options, the option of walking away. That's a very important one. And in order to allow this option to be there, part of sometimes what's needed is, again, stepping back and looking at our overall health with the three pillars of mental, physical, and financial, so that we've actually built from this perspective, this possibility, right? Because if we're maxed out from a personal finance perspective, the option of walking out may not be that real.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
And so that's in part, it is not a short-term planning again. And now we're back into the long-term, not extreme long-term, and it can start today for sure, reconnecting with your personal finance person. And if you don't have one, maybe the first step is to find one, because all these things are related. So for example, even if we know, obviously, instinctively, that if we're very stressed out and all this, that our personal finance may be suffering, our physical health may be suffering, we actually also have research showing that it could start from any of these three and impact the others. So there we have research showing that when there was one study particular that I was looking at, people dealing with low back pain were in much higher proportion also in needing to go to credit counseling, where their personal finance were in a really tough place. So all these three parts are interrelated. And so sometimes we tend to think, oh, I'm a leader, I'm, making this amount of money, and yes. And you may want to build your freedom over here, your ability to have this choice as realistically available, because it's not just a matter of saying, well, if it doesn't work, I'm going to walk away. Set things up. It may not be that easy to walk away. So preparing for this is part of the overall strategy, and the part that we don't talk about that much as well. So it could be an opportunity as well.
I love it. If there's anything that you would tell our community of leaders before you go in regards to managing their stress and their burnout, what would it be?
I'm going to go, since you've got a community of leaders, most people in this community of leaders would have some form of attachment to the sentence, what gets measured gets done. I don't think I've run into any leader so far that says, oh no, I don't, I don't care. Most leaders do. So then if that is true for business, that's going to be true for you. And therefore, here is a concrete action you could decide to take daily basis. So what you do is, after today's conversation, you print a calendar, 30 days and all this. You stick it at a place where you visit every night, brush your teeth, whatever. And every night you rate on a 0 to 10 scale your energy level overall average today. Yes, it's going to be imperfect. It may vary during the day. It doesn't matter. Simple. Just put a number. Okay, so overall today, pretty good, but demanding, 7.5. Fine. This took you now less than a second. And then you do that every day. Not a long investment of time. I know no one has additional time waiting for my recommendations, so that's very brave. But what this does is that as you write your numbers, 7.5, 8, 9.5, 9, 7, 6.5, 6, 6, 5, 5. You're going to catch it before you feel like you're at zero, which most leaders, because they're go-getters, optimistically biased, I call it, will disregard it until we have zero choice here. So what gets measured gets done. Catch it earlier, which then allows you to take action more proactively at a time of more energy, less pain, and you're applying what you preach on the business side on the personal.
I love it. Awareness comes before intelligence, right, Rob?
It's such a great tip, right? And it's like my therapist said the same thing to me, was like, she gets a lot of folks who are maxed out, burned out. And she's like, it can take months, like 4 to 8 months for folks to really get back from zero. And so the earlier you catch it, you know, you can be like a week or a couple weeks and you're back on the, you know, on the a path. And so it's being a little proactive and using a very practical and simple tip like that. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say also sometimes people listen to this, they like the idea, but even that, they're not sure they will actually commit to it. And so that's when working with a professional, you remind me of this, speaking about whether it's a therapist or an executive coach, then sometimes having that in the scheduler will allow you to make sure that it happens. Someone's checking, that hour is blocked, and it will happen. So if you find you're in that situation, in this phase right now, that could be another way to make sure it happens. But whatever it is, it needs to get measured to get done.
Yeah. Accountability systems are the hottest things in neuroscience. This is why we write things down, right? And even just to employ the support of somebody that is also working on this. I feel like the social accountability is also a really good way to help them stay on track with that.
Yeah.
Something I've loved is like a few of my parent clients, they use their kids as the way to keep them accountable, because the kids will never, like the kids will do it themselves too, but like they'll never not be like, hey, you dad, or hey mom, you didn't do this thing.
Yeah, it's so true. I use Brooklyn definitely as my little accountability system. And Bella, my dog, is a great accountability system because she gets me up and out the door.
And the beautiful thing when you do it with others, you're right. All of these are great options, but especially children, our children of others. Same logic as what I was describing earlier about we're doing this for our mental health and resilience. Let's not just say we did this. We did this for this purpose, because one of the pieces of research I was also looking at recently was how it was specifically on mothers in this particular one that sometimes felt guilty about working and not being 100% available all the time. And that particular study was showing how the modeling of how the parent, in this case the mother, was doing it had much more impact than presence or not presence. And so obviously, some good degree of presence is also important. But this particular piece was showing how the sharing of what, in this case, mothers we do to cope and to compensate and to build supply in the context of lots of demands, how that then has an impact, and a positive one for them moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's literally where I went with this leader yesterday. I was like, I pulled out the parent card. I was like, okay, like, yeah, model carries the most weight. And like, what are you doing first and foremost to stay in control of the controllables and all of that? But don't forget, you've got a little son there that's looking up to you to know how to feel about all of this stress too, right? So I think that that's really great, because one of the things we understand to be true as mindset coaches is that when you get a leader into their heart space in terms of why that's so meaningful and important, and you start to layer in the kids, right? Like that just makes it so much easier to stay in alignment with that value.
Yes, it does. And I find that's one. And the other one that I often find will connect them with what's really important is, even in the workplace, part of what will happen is they'll get to a point where, they're close to burnout, basically, and still don't want to, they know they need to take care of their health, but there's also turned towards their role, others, their various commitments here that they don't. And so it's as if they operate from a place of, and this is my role, this is what's best, if I stay turned towards all the others. And part of the conversation then, and others have tried to convince them to take time off, like they work with a psychologist, for example, and their physician, and they're all saying, oh my God, you need to take time off to take care of your health. And then they get to me in this context, I'm working as their executive coach, and then I'll say, okay, all this is true. Have you considered how at a point very soon from now, feeling the way you do and staying there will impact your performance? It will impact your brand. It will impact how you interact with others as leaders. You won't be the leader you prefer to be. And that's, for them, often what then connects with something, surprisingly, you would think, more than the fact that their health is close to zero over here. Mm-hmm. All the health professionals are saying that. But then I get close to their heart, to your point, when we're saying, you're going to now hurt, basically, the reputation, the brand, everything you've invested in so much for all these years, it's going to get impacted. Oh, then
talk about social accountability. Oh, that's literally what we were looking at in that article that you sent me there yesterday, just in terms of how 50 to 70% of new executives fail in the first 18 months. But they're talking in this article about the reason they fail is because they're underprepared. And I'm just sitting there reading that and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, because they were so stressed, right? Like they couldn't operate optimally. Like there's just no way at that elevation of visibility, right? That high pressure, high stakes. You get plopped in that underprepared, and I'm sorry, but that will sink your battleship. So it was saying that, right, is like how much that hurt these executives reputationally, and sometimes they couldn't even come back from it. And I was thinking, oh, that is where the system fails our leaders, right? Because they're not being prepared properly in terms of their resiliency. In terms of how to manage that. Yeah, but it also goes back to everything that you have really laid down for our leaders to understand, is that preparation is the mother of all skills when it comes to resiliency.
Yes. And, I love what you're saying, because one of the places that this book is going, and I already have a number of endorsers that are from business schools, but it's going into business school career centers. It's going into
That's where we need it. We need it even in university for our younger, kids that are in their undergrads, right? Because it's like we are failing. We're failing our employees even, like, in not setting people up for their working lives in this way. So I'm so happy to hear that, because we definitely got a deficit of that type of preparation happening. You said you went to your MBA to get prepared for leadership. Is that where you learned about all this stuff? Were they teaching this in the MBA?
No, they were not. It is a long time ago.
But no. They taught the metric, what gets measured gets done.
That's right. That part,
They weren't measuring any of this in terms of mental health, were they?
No. I definitely was the only psychologist in that program. And it's changed since then to some degree. I'm certain of it. However, what I still know, though, is that, yes, to your point, a number of early leaders will suffer quite a bit early in their work. And we know from research, early career, on one hand, we come with lots of energy, more youth, and all these things. However, we also come with less of a thick skin to some degree, more positive biases, which is good in some ways, but also putting us at risk. And so the more we're on the realistic side with this and good preparation, the better. And I do think there's a massive opportunity to change the direction. So hopefully we'll contribute to that.
We totally concur.
Absolutely. Marie-Helene, we have to ask you our big question before you get out of here. What do you want your legacy as a leader to be?
It's interesting because many times in my career so far, I've been asked, if, when it all ends, what would be the thing you want to leave? And now that I have the book, I'm like, well, it's in the book.
Yeah.
Yay, at least it's in the book. So, but I would say it's context. If we're going to context, so many things will fall into a good place. All the things we've talked about already. Also, being more compassionate towards others in the workplace, which we know then influences civility and respect, which then influences burnout rates. And we know all this from research, not just sounding good. It's true based on research. And also that will lead to more self-compassion, which we also need in order to take the time to invest. And so I think if we keep context in mind in a broader way, then we'll be in a really good place.
I love it. For folks out there, so we've dropped Marie-Helene's LinkedIn in the podcast notes. You can go to her website as well, drmarie-helene.com. I've dropped that in the podcast notes, and the book's coming out. Well, obviously, if you go to her website, you can sign up to be notified. But the new book, The Resilience Plan, A Strategic Approach for Optimizing Your Work Performance and Mental Health, is coming out in February. So stay tuned for that. Is there anywhere else you want folks to find you?
Well, there's even there's a site for the book, theresilienceplan.com, and it is available on pre-order now everywhere where you buy your books, whether it's your local or online, it's there. So you can contribute to the movement that way as well.
Perfect. We'll drop those in the podcast notes too. Obviously for us, head on over to elitehighperformance.com for any one-on-one coaching, group leadership programs, and more. Susan, and hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project on your favorite podcast platform, and drop us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. Susan, is there anything else you want to leave folks with today?
No, I love this interview. I feel like there's never been a more important time than now when stress is at its utmost and burnout's most rampant. I can't imagine a better time for us to be inspiring our leaders to go on this mission, right? Towards this aspect of self-responsibility, which is where empowerment begins. It's all about focusing on what you can do as a leader, not only to set yourself up to thrive sustainably, playing your biggest impact game, but then creating that model for your people to follow, right? Like, talk about a legacy factor. And I'm so glad that we have this book that we can share with our leaders who are ready to go on that mission. So thank you for coming in today to inspire our folks. I think they're going to love it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you to both of you, Rob and Susan. Great to be here.
Yeah, and it's a huge problem. So in 2016, the WHO made a study that said just shy of 750,000 people die each year due to stress at work. And so for folks out there, and this was 2016, so Gallup's reported that the stress has dramatically increased since then. And so if we're out there and we're leading a company, and one is we're noticing our own stress levels are increasing, our people's stress levels are increasing, we have to come together as a community to get on top of this, because literally people are dying. So I can't echo this enough, obviously. This is something that I'm super passionate about, but get on top of this, get the book, The Resilience Plan. You can reach out to Marie-Helene, you can reach out to Susan and I. We're here for you. We got a group and an amazing community of other 2.0 leaders that we can get you plugged into. And so that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.